Melissa Idris, and you're watching The Future is Female, the show where we find the extraordinary in every woman. Now, I'm here at Common Ground in Mount Kiara, and I'm joined today by two special guests, two healthcare campaigners. And Mother's Day is just around the corner. You know what? We should pay tribute to our mothers every day, but I thought it would be really timely today to talk about the issue of maternal health. So I'd like to welcome on the show Dr. Yolanda Augustine, who is an oncology research doctor, also a healthcare campaigner, and Agnes Padan, who is the daughter of Kam Agong. And we're going to be talking about her story today because it's a story of a mother's sacrifice, right? A mother of 8 who passed away 30 days after a cesarean section. 28 days after childbirth. So let's start there. Let's begin there, Agnes, because I really want to know about your mother's story and your work in keeping her story alive. And I'm really sorry to make you relive her death, and you've had to do it so many times. But tell me about your mother and what she had to go through.
Okay, my mom was admitted to Lawas Hospital.
This was in Sarawak?
Yeah, this is in Sarawak, Lawas, Sarawak. 2002.
So
yeah, 2002. That is
years
February 2002. Yeah, this child was the 8th pregnancy of my mom. So the previous 7 was a few of us were in the house where we live, and then few other are in the clinic, the nearby clinic at our home.
Mm-hmm.
So
are you the eldest, Agnes?
No, I'm the third in the family, so I'm the eldest daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So and this during this 8th pregnancy, she went down to Lawas. Actually, she was there already a few weeks earlier, waiting for her due. Okay. So she was there going for a checkup, and then on the 19th of February, she was admitted to the Lawas Hospital. This is a Lawas District Hospital, and during her time, and then she was having this complication, and then that's when they decided to what do you call that? Cesarean section on her, and things has happened too fast, I think so. And she was actually lost a certain amount of blood, and requested my father to go out and look for blood, donors, because they don't have it in their bank.
So just setting the scene, how far is the hospital? So Lawas is a small pekan, a small town in Sarawak. How far away is the hospital?
From my village, during that time, that was maybe 6 hours journey via Timber Road. And then when she was in town, that is like 45 minutes to the hospital. Yeah.
Okay, so when she was in hospital, doctors said that she needed an emergency cesarean. And previously the other 7 childbirths were natural childbirth?
Yeah, all natural childbirth.
All right, so what happened after the cesarean?
So after the cesarean, she was in the hospital for a few days, and then she went back. And she stayed with her sisters for a night in the town, so waiting for a transport to go up to Ulu. And then after that, she went back to Ulu the next day, and she was fine. I was there for 2 weeks in the Ulu waiting for her. So actually I went back earlier, just want to be with her a short while. Then I was there waiting for her, and then she was talking okay. She was complaining there's a lot of pain she has to go through, and then regretting whatever she's facing and all that. And then she was telling me, if I were you, I will never have want any child after this. She was telling me. So in that pain, she was complaining. Then after 2 weeks, I left. So I left to Kuala Lumpur because I have to follow my husband. So we are living in Kuala Lumpur. So after that, I left. And that's when the thing all started. She has this bleeding after 2 weeks, severe bleeding, and she rushed back again to the Lawas hospital with that 6 hours journey from the Ulu to the Lawas district hospital. And they checked on her, everything done. But then they never did blood transfusion. So and then after 48 hours later, they sent her back again.
Back home.
Yeah, they sent her back home again because it's difficult for them from the village. Their earning is very little, and then for them to come down from the Ulu to the nearby hospital, they have to spend like per person 45 ringgit, and then to go through, and that's 90 ringgit per person. But even if they want to come for something like this, the husband must follow. Yeah, and then what about the kids? Right. Yeah, and if they have no one in town, where are they gonna stay? And what are they going to eat and all that? All of that they have to think about, and that's the worries about villagers. And they are not from the, I don't say they are from a good, maybe middle income is not, they are not. They are from the lower income.
So, Dr. Yolanda, you've been campaigning for healthcare, maternal healthcare especially. Why is it important that we remember Kam Agong's story?
So basically, I watched the documentary last year, and I was really, really moved by it. And as a doctor, I feel very sympathetic or empathetic for what Kam Agong and Agnes and the family went through. And I think they have amazing courage in the fact that actually they made the documentary in the first place. And also I think what Agnes hasn't said is that the family actually took the case to court and defended it themselves in court and actually won. And I think that in itself was actually a landmark victory for them.
So you took the case in terms of medical negligence to court?
Yeah, it is medical negligence.
And won?
Yeah, we won, and that's quite sometimes actually 2 years for us to win the case, but it's worth it.
Yeah, so they received a small amount of compensation, but basically that can never really compensate for the loss of a life and the loss of a mother. And I think, then for Agnes and her husband Lawrence to basically, after all this time, go back and film the documentary to really highlight the issue of healthcare and maternal healthcare in their area and in their village. I think that was incredibly brave and also painful because each time Agnes has to talk about it or campaign, she's reliving, the trauma that they went through.
Why do you think it was important to keep it alive, or to make this documentary and to keep talking about it at great personal cost to yourself? Why do you want to do it?
Okay, for me, I am from the poorest family, so I know what day we have to go through for the rest of 17 years, and I don't think I will want to see any mom to go through, any family to go through what we have to go through all this while. And it's no one can bear such things with the 28 months infant. I don't think so. And we want to share this documentary is not because we're still angry with the government or we are still angry with the doctors, we're still angry with whoever has involved. It's not that now. Now it's not that. We want the people in Lawas or in Sarawak, the whole of Sarawak, must know their rights they're supposed to ask for their health from the government, must know their right. They have to ask for it. It's not by you keeping quiet, the government just provide. They won't.
Do they not know? The people that you grew up with, the women that you saw when you were growing up, do they know what their healthcare rights are?
I'm not sure, but I think they don't, especially my aunties, where those in the videos, in the documentary, say we are kampung people. So our education level is, very basic. So we don't know about all of this stuff unless someone come and explain to us and advise us. Yeah, we'll be okay with it, but no one does.
So I think actually the broader context is that Agnes and the family really want to see systemic change, and actually something that doesn't just affect one community, but basically can be seen throughout the whole of Sarawak and also some areas in Sabah. And I think on the back of that, basically last week we actually had another Kam Agong documentary screening at Ruang in Kuala Lumpur, and we actually had a community of Orang Ulu women and also local community people come over, and they were from Ulu Belaga, which is an area that's quite far from Agnes, but they share similarities in terms of difficulty accessing healthcare and service provision. And Penghulu Nyalang was one of the Penghulus that came across as well to watch the documentary, and his village is actually very, very remote. So I think from Balaga town you travel about 4 or 5 hours by four-wheel drive, then you take a further boat upriver for another 2 or 3 hours. And we could see that actually they were visibly moved by the documentary. It was the first time they were watching this, and actually it was a documentary in their own language, and I think it's probably actually the only documentary that we have about the Orang Ulu community in their own language. And there were women crying in the audience because they actually totally understood and could relate to what was going on in the documentary, because they themselves had been through similar issues with their own pregnancies, and also they had also lost family and friends, other women in that state.
Did you talk to any of them at the documentary screening?
Yeah, we've been talking, chatting with each other actually. So I was very happy for them being there at the screening. So at least I can share. No, it's not just about my story. I'm not to say I'm proud about my documentary, but what they are saying, what are they sharing is like, oh yeah, it is really happening. It's not just me. It's not just us. It's everywhere in the remote area in Sarawak.
So you found that your mother's story was relatable because other women have gone through similar experiences.
Yes.
So is it a question of access? You know, you talked a little bit about it takes so long to get to the nearest hospital. You know, then you have the cost of it. Then the husband has to follow, and then who's going to take care of the children? And what happens if someone's hospitalized? It feels like there are so many obstacles working against people who need healthcare, medical attention in some of the remote areas. So tell me about the intricacies of the nuances of this problem. What needs to be looked at? I mean, it feels like everything needs to be looked at, but can you pick it apart for me?
Yeah. So I mean, I think what the documentary does is actually really put a spotlight on all of this. And I think what's going to happen next is that the Orang Ulu women and the communities that came for the screening, they're actually going to take the documentary to their own longhouses. And they're going to be, and also it was very nice, I think Agnes and Lawrence did a screening in early April in their longhouse in Long Samado. And obviously the community was very moved. That was the first time they had watched it.
So Lawrence is your husband, who is also the director of the documentary.
Yeah.
So this was a labor of love for your family to tell the story of your mother.
Yeah, I think so, but also to love other person, you know, other family. It's not just about my family now.
It's a wider cause, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
How
And actually, just going back to your question about what needs to happen next.
Yes.
So I think, you know, it is very complicated and challenging. We appreciate that because the terrain in Sarawak is not an easy one. But I think for too long, actually, we've seen that Sarawakians tend to be at the back in terms of the whole discussion about healthcare, about service provision. So what we really are trying to do is actually now take this to the next level, where we really get the government to commit that Sarawak and Sabah and rural communities are actually going to be at the top of their healthcare agenda. So as a result of the campaign, Agnes and Lawrence basically put together a petition, and they got 5,500 signatures. And there were two asks in the petition. One was actually focusing more specifically on Lawas, because they've been campaigning for a hospital in Lawas for over 17 years.
And it's not been built yet.
And the new facility, has it been built? No. And actually what's happened is that the community in the local area have actually really lost confidence in the service, which means that actually a lot of people are now going to Limbang or Miri.
Which is further away. It will take a longer time to get there.
And actually to go from Lawas to Miri can take up to 7 hours, and you have to go through checkpoints at Brunei as well. And it costs... Yeah.
It's 8 time stops.
Yeah,
Wow.
8 checkpoints, yeah. And it costs about, is it 150 ringgit return journey?
7,500, yeah.
So let's just highlight again, I mean, this is an event of a medical emergency. You have to travel 7 to 8 hours to get to the nearest hospital.
From Lawas, but if you're going from Long
Lawas.
Semado, that could be 12 hours. So if you want to get to a centre where you know that you are going to have specialist treatment and you're going to have all the facilities to adequately manage a complication, essentially I don't think you really have a chance to get there.
I think we often forget, you know, women in urban areas, women who are privileged to have access to healthcare. It's a car ride away. It's, you know, it's the nearest private hospital, and you're checked into an air-conditioned room where you have all the medical attention that you need, and to get you through such a difficult time, you know. But in a medical emergency, when you're about to give birth and you're traveling hours on end on timber roads, as you said, at having to stop for checkpoints, it really is something that we have to be cognizant of.
And even some of these women don't have ICs, so that again could be a blockage to them actually getting to Miri in the first place, because they need an IC to go through the immigration
You need
checkpoint.
documentation.
Yeah.
So, Doctor, what is the current situation with maternal, the mortality rate for maternal? Is there a high mortality rate?
So I think for many years we didn't actually know the up-to-date figures in terms of maternal mortality in Sarawak. In the 90s, it seemed that actually Sarawak had a much higher maternal mortality rate compared to West Malaysia. Over 90 per 100,000 women were basically dying in childbirth, as opposed to about 32 per 100,000 in West Malaysia. Then a couple of years ago, Sarawak state government did publish some new statistics suggesting that the maternal mortality rate had actually gone down and was a lot lower, and perhaps even better than in West Malaysia. However, we would actually also like to challenge that to an extent, because we feel that actually the maternal mortality rate in rural areas may be different to what we're seeing in the urban areas in Sarawak, because obviously you have some urban areas like Kuching, Bintulu, Miri, where people can still get pretty good healthcare access, perhaps comparable to what you get in the Klang Valley.
Right.
But what's really happening in some of these areas, in the longhouses in the interior, where women are actually traveling or having to travel 12 hours to get to a specialist centre, we believe actually is probably a different situation. And the other issue is that many of these women actually that give birth in the longhouse or go back to the longhouse after giving birth may actually die there or undergo complications that are not documented.
Because that's not part of the statistics.
Exactly. So I think what we really need to do is look at the data in more depth, but actually at the same time we need to capacity strengthen and improve services locally.
What does that mean? Capacity strengthen and improve services locally.
So I think basically in all of this, we're obviously aiming for helping doctors as well in local areas, because it's a very challenging situation, and we know that there are a lot of junior doctors that sometimes get posted out to peripheral postings in very rural areas who may not have the competencies or may not be fully trained or adequately supported to actually face a lot of complications. And I was talking to a doctor the other day who basically was posted to the interior when he was a very junior doctor, and he basically had to deal with cesarean sections and complications in the middle of the night, and he was very frightened because he didn't have the right support, he didn't have the ability to, call for senior help if things were going wrong. So I think first of all, we really would like the government to have a proper proper look and do a systematic review of what services are out there in Sarawak and where the gaps are, and also to try and identify where the hot spots of problems are, because Sarawak is a big state and it's probably difficult to try and change everything all at once, but I think they need to really identify where are the areas where people are really, really suffering, where there are really, really poor facilities, and then go in to try and improve that quickly in those areas. So I think first of all it comes also to the local clinics in the villages. I mean, we've heard stories of some local clinics being very broken down, not having adequate facilities, not having simple equipment, working equipment like blood pressure monitoring.
Because you want to make sure that local clinics are well equipped because they're the nearest point of access.
Exactly. And even in Long Semado clinic in Agnes's village, basically they can't have a blood, the villagers there can't get a blood test done there, so they have to actually travel to Lawas.
Because there's no lab?
There's no one to take the blood tests, So they've got to travel to Lawas for that. So for many of them, they may never really get to go to have their bloods tested if they've got anemia or they have another complication. And the other thing is training midwives and training nurses and also medical assistants in these areas. Because a lot of the time, the midwives and medical assistants may actually stay there longer term than the doctors per se. So I think it's really about strengthening allied healthcare professionals, empowering them to basically help the local community. And we want to actually see more midwives from Sarawak's indigenous communities. Because basically, not enough indigenous communities are having doctors and nurses and midwives trained. So one of the problems we find is that a lot of West Malaysian doctors get posted to Sarawak, and particularly if they're in a very rural area, sometimes it might be a bit of a hardship posting. Right. And they're not going to have the same
connection.
Yes, and investment in the community. So if we can actually get more of the indigenous communities being trained up, and that comes into the national training curriculum for doctors, I think there we will actually start to see a long-term systemic change. And also there are courses, there are many external international courses to do with training trainers, to do with managing maternal complications. And I'm in touch with some obs and gynae doctors who are Malaysian as well, and they spoke about this recently at their perinatal society meeting, which basically brought together a lot of obs and gynae doctors and also pediatric specialists. And they've given a commitment actually to work together with the government and also local doctors.
So really just getting, this isn't just turning to the government and looking to the government to solve all the problems. It's getting everyone involved, community, stakeholders, the medical fraternity, but also empowering the local community, not just with financial budget, but also training and the knowledge. Is the problem similar, or the other issues similar in Sabah as well? Because we talked a lot about Sarawak, but in the neighbouring state of Sabah, are we seeing some of the same obstacles and challenges? You just came back from Sabah, didn't you?
Yes, I was in Sabah yesterday actually, where we were launching a program, Rose, which is another program that I think we'll talk to you about sometime as well.
Definitely. That's another show on itself.
But I think Sabah in general does actually tend to have, I think, better road access. So I think compared to Sarawak, perhaps not as challenging, but certainly we know from doctors and friends living there that actually there are very similar themes coming up in terms of the rural communities and how some of the women in very far away interior places are actually finding it very difficult to access healthcare, just because of, first of all, the awareness about maternal screening and what they should be doing.
So it's really about bringing the awareness to the communities.
Yes, and then also local services again, about trying to strengthen maternal services in their locality, and also about capacity, ensuring that we actually give the doctors and midwives and nurses working in that area the best support possible, the best training possible, so that they're confident in managing some of these problems and issues. So I think it's really got to be a collaborative approach that involves all stakeholders, the medical profession, the government, patients, as well as families, because ultimately this is an issue that affects everybody.
That's right. Which is why I think it's so important that your documentary helps shine a spotlight, helps spread the word. it's an important piece of film, you know, and it helps get the word out there. What kind of response have you gotten from the petition, Agnes? Have you had any feedback coming from the different stakeholders about after you've submitted your petition?
Oh, well, from the local, I think, yeah, they're being very supportive, but still that the feeling of afraid, you know, like
about the local community.
Yeah, local community, they are too afraid to. Yeah, they do ask me also, actually, is this for me, I signed this, is it for me to be the witnesses or something? And I said, no.
Worried about getting into trouble.
Right, putting it, okay. How does a petition work, essentially?
Yeah. So, but then I think it's, it's worth of, our cause is worthwhile. So.
Yeah, and then basically the 14th of April was actually International Maternal Health and Rights Day. So prior to that, actually, YB, Dr. Zul, the health minister, actually met with Agnes in Parliament and received the petition from her. And he was very positive in his feedback. So he said he was actually already planning to visit Lawas Hospital, and he'd actually watched the documentary as well. And he was moved by it. And he's given a firm commitment to say that he will work on changing the situation in Sarawak and making sure that no one's left behind. So I think now it's really about looking at what the details of that are and just continuing to keep awareness on and spotlighting it on here. And actually on the 29th of April, Agnes is also going to be presenting to the Kaseh wives. So those are actually the wives of the ministers. They've asked to have a documentary screening as well, and we're happy with that because I think the more mothers, the more wives, the more women in Malaysia that can hear about the story of what happens in the interior in Sarawak and Sabah, the better.
Well, thank you both so much for all the work that you've been doing, getting the word out there. It's important, and I thank you very much for that. And thank you for coming on the show. And happy Mother's Day to all mothers out there. I'm Melissa Idris. You've been watching The Future is Female. We're going to be back next week speaking to extraordinary women. So join me then.